Her scream sliced through the black of night. The sound of skin striking skin echoed inside the rickety shack as rough hands dragged Laya Monroe across the dirt floor. Only 23, yet her body bore the map of endless cruelty, bruises, cuts, and the fading color of defiance. The men jeered while Sheriff Silas Blackwood leaned back in his creaking chair, watching as though it were a game he owned. They shoved her into a corner, ripped the ribbon from her hair, and spat words sharp enough to cut bone. "Tomorrow," the sheriff sneered, a smile coiling across his scarred face. "You'll stand in the square. We'll shave that pretty head of yours in front of every soul in Dust Ferry. Let them see what happens to a woman who dares raise her voice against me." Laya's breath came ragged, chest-heaving, pride burning hotter than the pain. She understood what that sentence meant. Not death, something crueler. A living disgrace. A slow public ruin that would leave her spirit bare before the crowd. Every tick of that endless night dragged over her like chains. Her wrists were bound, her body aching from the blows, but her eyes still held a glimmer of rebellion. She whispered to herself that she would not let them win. Better to die running than live bowed in shame. When the guard outside slumped into sleep, she took her chance. She threw her shoulder against the rotten wood wall. It groaned but held. Again harder. Splinters bit her arms, but she didn't stop. On the third strike, the panel cracked open. She clawed through the jagged hole, tearing her skin, forcing her body into the storm. Rain lashed her bare shoulders as she stumbled into the yard, clutching nothing but a filthy canvas sheet stolen from the cell. Her feet, torn raw by gravel, beat desperate rhythm into the mud. Behind her, doors burst open, voices bellowing, boots crashing. But thunder drowned it all, hiding her flight beneath the storm's roar. She ran until her lungs burned like fire, until the wind itself tried to tear her away. She plunged into the reeds by the river, pressing herself against the wet earth. Her body screamed in pain, yet her mind repeated one command: keep moving. Don't stop. Don't let them catch you. Hours crawled by. The cold sank into her bones. Her teeth rattled, but her will stayed fierce. She pressed her face to the dirt, whispering a prayer into the rain. In her mind flashed the horror of tomorrow, the square, the sneering crowd, the hiss of scissors scraping her scalp. She could almost hear their laughter as her pride fell to the ground. Tears slid over her bruised cheeks, but she clenched her fists and swore they would never see her bow. When dawn's first light crept across the horizon, the rain eased. Laya crawled from the reeds, drenched, trembling, the canvas sheet clinging to her frame. Her heartbeat was wild, her eyes darting at every sound. Every shadow was a hunter. She told herself she had survived the night, but could she survive the morning? Then, from beyond the bend came the echo of hooves, distant then nearer. Her breath caught. Her body stiffened. Had they already found her? Terror wrapped its fingers around her throat. And in that frozen moment, one question rose louder than her heartbeat. If the law itself is wicked, if mercy is gone, who will rise for a woman when the world wants her broken? The sun was climbing high when she staggered from the riverside. The sky shone clear, but her body trembled as though the storm still clung to her skin. Her bare feet were bleeding, her arms streaked with mud, the canvas sheet heavy and damp against her. She followed the river's curve, searching for any sign of life, a house, a barn, anything. But the land stretched wide and empty, the tall grass whispering in the warm breeze. Hunger gnawed her belly, thirst split her lips. She stumbled, slower, slower, until her knees buckled beneath her. That's when she heard it. Hooves striking dry earth, steady, close. Her heart lurched. She forced herself up, clutching the sheet against her chest. Every sound was a sentence. They've come for me. It's over. Out of the glare of the sun emerged a rider, a tall man astride a dark horse, his shoulders broad beneath a dust-stained coat, his face carved by years of wind and sun. A red scarf rested at his neck, and under the brim of his wide hat, his eyes were hidden but keen. In his hand, a hunting knife flashed, small yet deadly, catching a streak of light as he leaned forward in his saddle. Laya froze. Breath shallow, heart hammering. The terror of the night returned like lightning. She dropped to her knees, clutching the sheet close. Words tumbled from her lips before she could stop them. No. Please don't shave it off. The rider halted, his horse pawing at the ground, uneasy. He stared down at her, confusion softening the edges of his rugged face. He saw not a fugitive, but a woman beaten, trembling, and begging for the last shred of her dignity. Slowly he slid the knife back into its sheath and raised both hands where she could see. "I don't aim to harm you," he said, voice calm, steady as riverstone. But Laya shook her head, rocking in the dirt, her voice cracking as she repeated, "Please, don't shave my head, please." He stepped down from the saddle, movement slow, deliberate. He unwound the red scarf from his neck and laid it on the ground between them, then backed away. From his saddlebag he took a canteen, setting it beside the scarf. No threats, no sudden moves, only silence and patience. For a long moment she stayed still. Then the wild thirst overcame her. She reached out, snatched the canteen, and drank as if life itself poured through that water. Drops slid down her chin, and for the first time since her escape, her body eased. The man studied her quietly. "Name's Cole Bennett," he said at last. "But that ain't the question." He glanced toward the horizon, where a faint dust cloud began to rise, the sound of more hooves rolling on the wind. "The question is whether we have enough time before they catch up." Cole's jaw tightened as the sound grew louder, the sharp rhythm of a posse closing in. He'd heard that cadence before, hunters on the chase. He turned back to Laya. She still clutched the canteen, hands trembling, eyes fierce despite her weakness. In that gaze, he saw the unbroken will of a woman who had endured the storm and still refused to yield. "Up," he said, motioning to his horse. She hesitated, then, with his help, pulled herself into the saddle. He mounted behind her, steady and sure. The rumble of hooves was closing fast. "Hold on," he muttered. The horse leapt forward, tearing down the riverbank, weaving through tall grass. Laya clung to him, breath sharp and ragged, wind slicing her face. Branches whipped against her arms. Gunfire cracked behind them, one shot slicing through the grass inches away. Cole ducked low, urging the horse faster, steering into the reeds. The posse thundered past the first bend, scattering through the brush. Cole pulled the reins, bringing the horse to a halt. "Stay low," he whispered. They slipped into the reeds, crouched in the shallow water as the men closed in. Boots splashed nearby. One rider spotted movement and charged. Cole stepped out first, his fist swinging hard. The man toppled into the mud, gun tumbling from his hand. Another raised a revolver. Cole snapped his own pistol up and fired, the bullet striking true, knocking the weapon away. Through the chaos, something inside Laya shifted. Fear that had ruled her now turned to fury. When another deputy lunged, she snatched a broken branch and swung with all her might. The crack echoed. The man stumbled, blood running from his temple. She stood shaking but unbroken. Cole gave a short nod. "You fight better than half the men I've met." For the first time, Laya almost smiled. She realized she wasn't just running anymore, she was standing her ground. But the fight was far from done. More men were coming, and Blackwood himself was still out there, waiting to finish what he'd started. Cole knew running could only last so long. By dusk, he guided Laya toward Fort Allen, a lonely outpost clinging to the edge of law and dust. The courthouse there wasn't much to look at, paint peeling from warped boards, flag hanging limp, the drone of flies filling the still air. Yet it was the only patch of ground where justice might still have a pulse strong enough to stand against Sheriff Blackwood. Laya walked beside him, the canvas sheet now pinned with a strip of cloth torn from his saddlebag. Every step was a battle, but her chin stayed lifted. She was done crawling through life. She wanted the world to see that she was more than the marks on her skin. Inside the courthouse, a heavy man slouched behind a cluttered desk stacked high with yellowed papers. His small eyes blinked slow, and a greasy smile spread when Cole mentioned Blackwood's name. Laya felt her stomach sink. She recognized that look, the look of a man already bought and paid for. Cole dropped a small black ledger onto the desk. "This here book holds every bribe, every unlawful arrest, every woman that Sheriff humiliated," he said, voice tight with anger. But the judge only shrugged, drumming his fingers as though counting minutes until supper. Then the doors banged open. Blackwood's deputies stormed in, led by Evan Pike, a dirty bandage still wrapped around his skull. His grin was all venom.
"Thought you could run, girl?"
he sneered. "Thought you could hide?" The room exploded into chaos. One deputy lunged for Laya. She grabbed the nearest thing, a bottle of ink from the judge's desk, and hurled it square into the man's face. The black liquid splattered, blinding him as he howled and stumbled back. Cole drew his gun and fired a warning shot into the ceiling. The sharp crack silenced the room. "Any man moves another inch and I'll drop him where he stands," Cole barked. For a heartbeat, the courthouse froze. Even the judge sat pale and speechless. Then Laya snatched up the wooden gavel and smashed it into the nearest window. Glass rained down as sunlight burst through. Her chest heaved, eyes blazing with defiance. She wasn't the trembling girl begging for mercy by the river anymore. She was fire and steel, and everyone could see it. Cole turned to the stunned judge. "You'll send a wire to the U.S. Marshal right now," he said coldly. "And you'll hand him that ledger yourself if you care for what's left of your reputation." Sweat rolled down the man's neck. His fingers shook as he reached for the telegraph key in the corner. But outside, the rumble of a crowd was growing. Word had spread. Sheriff Blackwood had arrived, and he meant to make a spectacle of it. The square of Dust Ferry was packed tight when Cole and Leia stepped out into the glaring sun. The air felt thick enough to choke on. Blackwood stood tall at the center, his hand resting lazy on his pistol, his voice booming like thunder. He shouted that justice would be done the old way, that the girl would pay for defying his law. But this time, the crowd didn't cheer. They didn't laugh. They stood silent as Laya walked forward, her bruises still fresh, her tangled hair catching the wind. The torn sheet wrapped around her like armor. Her chin lifted higher with every step. When she reached the center, she did something no one expected. She took a lock of her own hair, cut it with a shard of glass, and let it fall into the dust. Her voice rang clear. "My honor don't live in my hair," she said. "It lives in my spirit, and no man can take that from me." A murmur rippled through the square. People glanced at one another, uneasy, shame rising in their faces. Even the deputies who once laughed alongside Blackwood dropped their gaze. Evan Pike reached for his gun, but Cole was quicker. His shot split the air, striking the revolver clean from Pike's hand. The crowd gasped, and in that moment thunder rolled again, not from the sky, but from hooves. The U.S. Marshal rode in with a line of men in clean blue coats. Dust flew. The Marshal's voice cut through the tension. "Sheriff Silas Blackwood, you're under arrest for corruption, abuse of power, and attempted murder." The iron cuffs clicked around Blackwood's wrists, and for the first time his smirk faltered. The square erupted, not in cruel laughter this time, but in cheers. Justice, real justice, had finally found Dust Ferry. Laya trembled, but the shaking came from relief, not fear. Cole laid a steady hand on her arm. "You're safe now," he whispered. She nodded, eyes shining through the grime. Weeks later, the town was changed. The crooked laws torn down. The fear that once ruled its streets replaced by quiet hope. Laya began teaching children in a small schoolhouse by the river, her voice calm, her laughter soft. Cole built a wooden bridge nearby, a safe crossing for travelers who'd once been too afraid to stop. Life was returning, slow and sure, like grass pushing through ash. And yet the story left behind a question, one older than dust and deeper than fear. What gives a soul the strength to rise when everything's stacked against it? Is it the will to survive, or the refusal to let another man decide your worth? And when the day comes that injustice stares us in the eye, will we stand like Leia did, or turn away in silence? If her courage lit a spark in you, tip your hat and share her story. For in every fight for dignity, whether in a courtroom, a town square, or the quiet of your own heart, the stand itself is what keeps justice alive. Because in the end, every soul that dares to rise is a story worth remembering.